Good. Thank you. There are two primary manufacturers of sensors used in the cameras that we use for amateur astronomy. Kodak, now called TrueSense, and then Sony sensors. Sony's had a lot of smaller sensors available in their scientific division for a long time that are very heavily used in life science, but have not been popular in the main astroimaging market just because the sensors are pretty small. They recently introduced these two new sensors that are a 6.1 megapixel and 9.2 megapixel sensors. They're both identical size. The actual physical image array is the same size. The 9 megapixel sensor has a smaller pixel than the 6 megapixel sensor. Just in comparison, you see the 8300 on the left and the Sony ICX814 on the right. This is a 9 megapixel sensor. This is an 8.3 megapixel sensor. The total surface area of the Sony sensors is about half of the 8300. There's three properties that these Sony sensors have that are really pretty remarkable. The first thing is that the Sony sensor is an interline transfer sensor. It doesn't require a mechanical shutter. Astro cameras typically have mechanical shutters for being able to do unattended dark frames. It's convenient to be able to block the light from striking the sensor in order to capture your darks. As you see in this blue line, this is a QE curve from a Kodak interline transfer sensor, like the 2020 or a 4022, very popular camera a few years ago. Interline transfer sensors, because of the architecture of how they're designed, typically have lower QE than full-frame sensors because there's more circuitry on top of the silicon. First remarkable thing about these Sony sensors is that they have higher QE than any but the non-anti-blooming Kodak sensors. This line up here is the Kodak KF3200, which is a full-frame non-anti-blooming sensor. So if anybody ever had an ST10 or one of our 532, 632 models, fantastic for science because it's just remarkable QE, up close to 90%. But the problem is that they bloom. When you add blooming circuitry, that also blocks more light from striking the sensor. So typically when you add anti-blooming, the QE goes down. So Sony's performed some magic to be able to get the QE of these new sensors up like 75%. Compared to the 8300, peak at about 60%. And also notice that it shifts slightly toward the red. So even out here at magical HA line, you still got about 65% QE. Quite remarkable. This actually is not to scale, but just to illustrate a point. The pixel size on the KF8300 is 5.4 microns. The pixel size on this 9.2 megapixel Sony sensor is 3.7 microns. So a lot of people worry about image scale. I actually don't worry about that too much. When you take your DSLR out to take pictures of a football game or a sunset or a moth or a hummingbird, you rarely think about, oh gee, have I got the right image scale for picking out details. Once you get to a certain level, it really is just about time. Are you using your time most effectively in astroimaging with a certain size pixel? But as long as you're not undersampled, you can produce beautiful images. Again, with a smaller pixel, though, you may not be making the best use of your time. Full well depth of a pixel is fundamentally determined by the size of the pixel. A larger volume of silicon can hold more electrons, meaning a higher full well depth. So the published full well depth of the Kodak 8300 is about 25,500 electrons. The actual physical capacity is higher than that, but Kodak specifies a number that meets other specifications. They specify linearity and other things, so they can specify all the other characteristics up to that point. Sony doesn't publish full well depth for these sensors, so we're able to determine that through photon transfer curve analysis. And the physical capacity of the sensor is higher than this as well, but we've picked this number as kind of an equivalent number to the Kodak number. The physical capacity is higher, but as you get higher and higher up, the anti-blooming circuitry takes more and more of the charge and dumps it to ground. Once you get above this, the linearity really tails off pretty quickly. So we think that's kind of a good number just in general for keeping in your mind. Both these sensors have perfect noise characteristics, so with supporting camera circuitry, you can get the same perfect FFTs that Craig Stark talked about in his talk and some others have mentioned. So the sensor is able to support the kind of scientific imaging where we want that perfect random distribution noise, so as you stack images, you're able to get better and better and closer to the true amount of light striking any given pixel. Key thing that people really love about the Sony sensors is they have a much lower population of hot pixels. It's lower dark current in general, quite significantly lower, but the thing that really is most appealing is how the population of hot pixels, of bright pixels, gets reduced. So this is a dark frame stretched, obviously, from an 8300. When you look at equivalent dark frame from an ICX814, you see that there's about 1% the number of bright pixels. Now, when you do proper dark frame subtraction, bright pixels go away in both cases. So if you're going to be doing dark frame subtraction, it isn't a huge factor. The thermal current on the 8300 is so low that at minus 10 or minus 20, even on a 10-minute exposure, you're only talking about 1 electron of noise, which gets swamped by everything else going on in the image. So if you're going to be doing full calibration, this is not a significant factor. It's nice. When you look at the raw images coming out of the camera, they're beautiful and stunning, and it's very appealing when you see it, just kind of viscerally when you look at it. It just looks beautiful, whereas the Kodak image looks kind of modeled. But after you dark subtract, they're going to look about the same. So I just put together a little chart kind of summarizing the key details. Again, the size, first of all, the 8300 is about twice the surface area of the 6 and 9 megapixel Sony sensors. The pixel size, 5.4 micron for the 8300. The 814 is 3.7 micron. The 6 megapixel Sony sensor, the 694, is a 4.54 micron pixel, so kind of in between those. Peak QE, Sony totally dominates, really remarkable in QE compared to 60%. 60% is still extraordinary when you think about it. 6 out of every 10 photons that have made their way across the galaxy or across the universe managed to find their way into your telescope, down into the CCD, and get recorded for you to print out in an image you can put up on your wall to share with your friends. Dark current, 0.02 electrons per second per pixel on the 8300, a tenth of that on the Sony. So the Sony sensors absolutely have lower thermal current, these latest ones. But again, because this number is already so low, so even in a 10-minute or even a 30-minute image for your narrowband imagers, the amount of noise in the thermal current gets swamped by other factors. So it really isn't a significant factor. Full well depth, higher on the Sony, but notice the read noise. The read noise is about half on the Sony sensors as well. At the end of the day, the most important factor in choosing a sensor, you want size, but the ultimate thing is the signal-to-noise ratio of the data. And in these cases, it's almost identical. So you take the full well depth, you divide by the read noise to get the distinguishable levels of gray, how many different levels of gray you can show. And I've just turned this into dB here, but the net effect is that this is about double and this is about double as well. So the net signal-to-noise ratio of these sensors is almost identical. If you're not going to be doing calibration, the Sony sensor, absolutely the way to go. If your telescope can support a wider flat field of view and you want to get the widest field of view for your telescope, the Kodak is a better system. I wish I could give you some obvious winner in this fight, but it's pretty close. It really comes down to your goals and what you want to do with your imaging. The Sony sensors are actually more expensive than the 8300. Right now, we still have introductory prices on our 660 and 690 models. That's about to go up. We're now caught up with the early orders, so we're going to be raising the prices a couple $100. So if anybody's interested in buying one of the Sony-based cameras, now's the time to do it. You'll save a little bit of money. And I will leave you with that.